Hello, investigators, and welcome to Until the End of Time. My name is Veronica. Thank you so much for tuning in. In this video, I'll be looking at 7 more cards for the upcoming Scarlet Keys expansion. This is most of the cards previewed for July. We have 4 new cards here. Salvage, previewed by Obscure Studies. One in the Chamber, previewed by Tengu Unplan. Sin Eater, previewed by Drawn to the Flame. Alchemical Distillation, previewed by Optimal Play. Existential Riddle, previewed by yours truly. Ectoplasmic Horror, previewed by Miskatonic University Radio. And String of Curses, previewed by Reddit. As always, I'll be going through these cards one at a time and giving a brief overview of my thoughts on them, as well as some of the community discussion that I've seen so far. This is not meant to be an exhaustive look at these cards, but just something to get your mind going on where you could take these cards and what kind of decks they might find a place in. First up, we have Salvage, previewed by Davi over at Obscure Studies. Salvage is a 0-cost, 2xp survivor event with a single intellect icon. It is insight traded and reads: choose an item asset in your discard pile. Either choose one, remove that asset from the game and gain resources equal to its cost, or play that asset paying its cost. You feel a bit discarded too. So this plays into the item theme that we've seen more and more in Survivor recently. It works kind of like a one-time scavenging that doesn't require a skill test. Unfortunately for Bob Jenkins, who despite his nice red Survivor card cannot take this card because he cannot take XP cards, it's still a very nice little tool in the Survivor toolbox. I'm kind of interested. So the things that I want to do with this card is use both modes potentially, because I think that this card is at its strongest if it can use either mode, and the flexibility that grants you gives you some options. Now, the problem there is that most of the big splashy items are not actually Survivor cards. Things like the 45 Thompson or the Narcotic Manuscripts are not in class for Survivor. And so this kind of feels like it's a better card as an off-action Survivor than it actually is as a main class one. Still, there are some pretty good things you can do with it. Having access to short supply obviously helps set this card up quite nicely. And anything that you can recur with this card is probably going to be quite good. Recursion is just always good, and this is another recursion tool in the Survivor toolkit. I think that this is a powerful card because of its flexibility, even if neither of the modes are necessarily cards you would play on its own at a 2 XP card. The fact that they're both on the same card and you get to pick whichever mode you need the most just makes this a very good utility card, and the fact that there's no skill tests involved mean that this card is always going to do what you want it to do, and that is something that is very powerful in the game of Arkham. Moving on, we have One in the Chamber by Tengu Unplan. One in the Chamber is a 0 XP 1-cost Guardian event with a combat and agility icons. It has the Fortune and Tactic traits, and it reads: fast. Play at the end of an attack or effect that spends the last ammo from a firearm asset you control. Add 1 ammo to that asset. You get +3 skill value for your next attack with that asset this round. I think this is a fantastic design. The art is also great. Art for this entire cycle has been fantastic so far. The thing with this card is that it's kind of like a little bit like an extra ammunition, but it's only 1 bullet, but it is only 0 XP. And so I think this card really shines in situations where you can make that 1 bullet really count. I'm thinking of the original shotgun from the core set. That card comes in with 2 ammo, but each one of those ammos could be 5 damage. So that's a really good thing here. And it also kind of in a way reminds me of Live and Learn, and maybe that's just because I play a lot of Survivor, but in the sense that it is, you get an ammo back, you can get a big boost on your next attack, so that feels very much like Live and Learn, especially when you play it on a firearm ability. But unlike Survivor, because this is Guardian, it still works even if you've passed the test. So when you walk into the room with your shotgun, blow 2 holes into the big boss, put another ammo into your shotgun, and then fire another bullet, that seems very good. I especially am calling out the shotgun because the +3 skill value for that is going to really matter, because it's probably going to translate into a couple extra points of damage because of the way how shotguns work. Now, the other thing to note here is because this is a tactic, Mark can take it. Sorry, inside joke. But also it can go and stick to the plan. I think this is actually a pretty nice stick to the plan card that maybe you replace down the line with extra ammunition, custom ammunition, swift reload if that's a card you can take. But as a 0 XP option, I don't think we have any other ways. We have Venturer, I guess, but we don't have another event that gives you another bullet. And so this being a fast way of getting just 1 more shot out of your gun when you most need it seems like an excellent stick to the plan target. I really like this card. I think it's neat. I think it is doing exactly what it needs to do and nothing more, which is a very kind of guardian feel. It's just like, this gives you another bullet, make it count. Next up, we have Sin Eater, which is probably one of the craziest cards we've seen so far. Sin Eater is a 3 XP exceptional card. It is permanent, so it has no cost, and it is an asset in the Mystic faction. It's ritual traded, and it has 2 abilities. The first is a free triggered ability. You can exhaust Sin Eater to move 1 Doom from an asset you control to Sin Eater, then either ready that asset or place 1 charge on it. And then as an action, you can remove all Doom from Sin Eater. It doesn't have to be ready in order to do that. This card is buck wild. This card is crazy good. So I did a video on Amina Zidane on this channel a couple of weeks ago, maybe a little longer at this point. I've been slightly behind on video recording, my bad. And I talked about like 4 different ways in which you can clear the Doom that Amina's ability adds to the assets, right? You can play an asset, reducing the cost by 3. This is the new Mystic from the expansion. I'm assuming you're familiar with her, but in case you aren't, here she is. And I assumed her ability was going to be balanced around the fact that you need to be very careful with the added Doom, because you obviously don't want to lose any rounds, but then you just have to get rid of your assets or do something like that. And now we have Sin Eater, and now we don't have to worry about it like at all. And in fact, we get upside for adding Doom to our assets. This card seems crazy good. Now, I'm not here to start screaming, oh, this is broken, but I was talking about LA in the last recap video, and I was saying, I'm pretty sure I said something like, well, this is the most powerful Doom manipulation card we've ever seen, and Sin Eater blows it out of the water. Sorry, Elle, I still love you, and I still want to play with you, but Sin Eater is so good. So imagine the following circumstances. You play an Arcane Initiate, she enters play with a Doom on it, you exhaust the Arcane Initiate, find a spell, then you exhaust the Sin Eater, move the Doom from the Arcane Initiate to the Sin Eater, then you ready the Arcane Initiate, you use her again, you find a second spell, and now at any point you need to, you can just spend an action to remove all the Doom from the Sin Eater. This card is fantastic. There are a bunch of cards already we've seen that interact with Doom, and I've talked about Doom a lot in the last couple of videos because Amina is just going to be the Doom manipulation investigator. So I'm very excited. I think this card is very strong. 6 XP I think is a real cost. I don't think I don't think that's something to be overlooked, right? This is going to be a hefty sum of XP to put in your deck, but the ability looks well worth it. It just lets you cast Moonlight Ritual on itself as an action at any point, and it is permanent, so you never have to worry about not having this ability. You can start putting down assets with Amina's ability from turn 1, using the Sin Eater to clear the Doom. And think about it like this. If you put 2 assets into play, use Sin Eater twice to move the Doom to Sin Eater, and then spend an action, you've spent an action to refund yourself 6 resources. That is better than most economy cards until you get to like Hot Streak level 4. This card is so good. And one final trick that I'm really excited about is actually the extra charges. Now, most Mystics can't just put Doom on spells that they control, though if you have the Eldritch Sophist, you can move charges around, so that would be one way to get around it. But you can now, as Amina, play a Rite of Seeking with a Doom on it, costing you 1 resource to play, and then you can use Sin Eater to get the Doom off of the Rite of Seeking and get an extra charge for your trouble, basically making you a Kachi in the process. This card seems fantastic. Please go listen to their podcast. I don't want to go into the minutiae of every possible interaction because there's a lot of them, and I think this card opens up a lot of potential play space. But I'm super excited for this card, and I'm probably going to do a deep dive on this card in a future video when we have seen a couple more Mystic cards that interact with it. I'm really excited for this. I'm really glad that it's level 3 and exceptional, because that means Marie can take it, because Marie can't take 4 or 5 Mystic. And I don't want someone like Charlie or an off-class Mystic to be able to take this, because then Doomplay would get too easy. I'm glad that it is still kind of restricted to the main class Mystics. Moving on, we have the Alchemical Distillation, previewed by our favorite boys in the pool, Optimal Play. Alchemical Distillation is a 2-cost Seeker asset with the customizable keyword, so it doesn't have a level, and it has a single willpower icon. It uses 3 supplies, and as an action you can spend one of those supplies to choose an investigator at your location and test Intellect 1. Notably, you're the one testing. It's not the chosen investigator. If you succeed, That investigator performs one of the following options: either draw 2 cards or gain 2 resources, and it takes up a hand slot. Now keep in mind, you have to be somebody at your location, but you are yourself an investigator at your location, so you can always use this to activate on yourself. And as it sits, that's fine. The fact that you have to spend the supplies before you take the test is a little tricky. I prefer to not spend supplies if I could potentially fail the test, especially when the power level of this card, as it sits, is not that fantastic, right? So you're spending an action and 2 resources to then spend 3 more actions to hopefully draw 6 cards. That's not that great in Seeker. Seeker gets better than that. And the resources are arguably worse. There are better economy cards than this. Now the flexibility is good, and obviously this is a customizable card, so we can do better. But as it sits, this card feels a little touch under the power level. One cute little note that I wanted to point out is with the previously previewed Map the Area, you can reduce the difficulty of all skill tests at a certain location by 1. Now I don't think you should be running Map the Area just to make Alchemical Distillation difficulty 0, but if you are planning on running Map the Area, keep in mind that reducing a test to 0 makes it almost always going to auto-succeed, so that makes this card a lot more reliable, which already is, getting me a little bit more excited to play this. But let's see what we can do by spending XP on this card, shall we? First up, we have the Mending Distillate, adds an option, heal 2 damage, and Calming Distillate, adds an option, heal 2 horror. As far as healing goes, this isn't the worst, though the fact that you have to test for it and you get a limited number of uses, and this doesn't go on allies, which is a big deal, makes me not super excited for this as my primary healing tool, but it could be a good inclusion if your deck doesn't otherwise use a lot of healing and you want to have kind of a backup healing. Maybe you have one of the Edge of the Earth weaknesses that needs to be healed, or maybe you're just going into a late campaign and you have some of the other options and you're like, well, we've been taking a lot of damage recently and we don't have that much health. Why don't we just get that as a backup option? Because it might just save your life, right? I'm a big proponent of this kind of healing doesn't really work and it slows you down too much and it's too much of a setback. But if it's the difference between winning the scenario and just getting, brutally murdered by some sort of Shoggoth, I'll take the bad healing. Next up, we have the Enlightening Distillate, which adds another option, place a charge or secret on an asset you control. Now keep in mind this is being done by the investigator you've chosen, so it doesn't have to be yourself. And this is actually, I think, a very powerful mode. It is in fact the most powerful mode, I think, on the card, is the ability to charge or secret assets you control. There are a bunch of cards in the game that are balanced around the number of charges or secrets or whatever they have, and some of them get very few and are tricky to recharge. This is potentially 3 extra uses, which that isn't that much, but there's more text to come. And this is, I think, the one where I feel you could potentially break this card, or at the very least, use it properly, it is a setup tool for a different card in either your deck or somebody else's deck, and the fact that this works on other investigators is quite nice in that context, to really, add a bunch of secrets or charges and really make that work. Next up, we have Quickening Distillate, which adds an option to move up to 2 times. Now, normally I wouldn't be too happy to trade one of my actions to move twice, but I am actually frequently okay with trading one of my actions to make an ally move twice. So I'm actually kind of happy about this card, and this is one of the other modes that I think is actually kind of neat, especially in the big maps like Edge of the Earth has a bunch of them, Innsmouth has a bunch of them. Having this 1 XP option to get a bunch of extra mobility when you need it on a card that you could already kind of run is nice. And this is again going back into that idea of do you want power in a card or do you want flexibility? This card is very high on the flexibility because it has all these different modes, but its power level is a little inefficient, right? It's costing you card and resources and actions to play this, and then you have to start taking tests in order to get what you actually want out of it, which is tricky, but the flexibility there can be quite nice. Next up, a very simple 2 XP option, Refined, Alchemical Distillation, enters play with 2 additional supplies on it. Now this doesn't solve any of the efficiency problems, but it does at the very least make it so that those 2 resources and that play action go a little bit further. Getting 5 uses out of this card, yeah, it seems perfectly fine. I wouldn't play this card if this is the only mode you have on it, but we're going to combine this with other modes to make this more worthwhile. Such as the Empowered mode. 4 XP. Remember that your XP goes across both copies, so this is more like a level 2 card than this a level 4 card. When you initiate this skill test, you may increase its difficulty by 2. If you do, increase the value of the effect granted by each option by 1 for this test. So that's a bit wordy, but basically what that means is instead of testing difficulty 1, you're now testing difficulty 3, but you can now draw 3 cards, or gain 3 resources, or heal 3 damage, or heal 3 horror, and so forth and so forth. This is a mode I really like. I think difficulty 3 intellect tests aren't that big of a deal for Seekers, at least not on normal difficulty. Most Seekers will have at least 1 card that increases their intellect passively, which means you're already at 6 if you're someone like Daisy or Mandy. And at that point, this is just, you're already 3 over. You don't even need to commit. If you want to commit, you can. And each of these modes get a lot better when you increase the value by 1. Like the difference between spending an action to draw 2 cards and spending an action to draw 3 cards is actually much bigger than you think, because the extra efficiency you're getting there is has to be really worth it. And so I really like Empowered as a way to make this card much more efficient. It makes the test more difficult, but so be it. And then finally we have Perfected. If you succeed, which is a 5 XP option, and if you succeed by 2 or more, the chosen investigator may perform 2 different options instead of 1. So this is really, I think, dependent on which options you have. By default, it turns it into Stand Together level 3, which is draw 2 cards and gain 2 resources, which is actually a pretty nice effect. Like that's good to be able to do 3 times. I think, again, the difficulty then being 3 is fine. I think if you combine, the problem that I have is if you combine Perfected with the previous one, Empowered, you have to suddenly succeed basically a difficulty 5 test, which gets very difficult. But I think in general, both of those last modes really just increase the efficiency of this card, which is what you want. I'm most excited for, I think, a combination Empowered, Quickening, and Enlightening. So your main use case there is using it to add charges or secrets to assets, hopefully 2 charges every time, which is 6 charges or 6 secrets over 1 use of this card. But the Quickening Distillate also lets us move up to 3 times, so if we have a big map we need to cross quickly, that's very good, and then I can slap on some healing or additional uses if I want to and I have spare XP lying around. So yeah, that's Alchemical Distillation. As with all the customizable cards, there's a lot of different options you can take, and we're gonna have to see which ones work out for, which investigators. Next up, we have Existential Riddle, which is my preview card. I hope you all saw my preview video. If not, top right corner, there's a link there right now. It's a 1 cost, 1 XP Seeker event, willpower and intellect icons. It has insight and paradox traits, and it reads Parlay. Choose a non-elite enemy at your location and test willpower or intellect 8. This test gets -1 difficulty for each other card in your hand. If you succeed, automatically evade the chosen enemy and attach Existential Riddle to it, and the attached enemy gains aloof. I've already talked a lot about the card and what kind of combos you can do with it. The only thing that I want to mention that I didn't bring up in the previous video is its interaction with Power Word. Power Word is this customizable mystic card that we saw in the announcement article that lets you control these enemies. The problem with it being that the enemy could still attack you if you didn't use the cower command to exhaust it. With the Existential Riddle, you can give that enemy aloof and then you don't have to worry about that anymore. So I really like this idea. Luke, I think, is the one who can most readily take advantage of that little combo, and I really look forward to seeing what people do with it. If you're more interested in hearing more about this card, please check out my previous video. It was very fun to preview this card, and I still think that the art is fantastic. Alright, moving on, we have the Ectoplasmic Horror from the Miskatonic University Radio. Now this is an interesting one, because it is a basic weakness, and it is a basic weakness enemy, with 2 fight, 2 health, 2 evade, is a monster and Geist, and then has a new line of text, Mystic Investigator only. I can only assume that this is the first of a series of class-specific weaknesses, which is something we haven't seen before, but I see no reason why it couldn't exist, and I'm really excited to see what they do with it. This enemy in particular has Hunter, and reads the first time you reveal a Chaos token while attacking or evading or attempting to evade the Ectoplasmic Horror, reveal an additional token for each empty arcane slot you have, and it deals 1 horror. Now, there's immediately a bit of a rules conundrum here, which is that this is not a forced ability, and there is no limit or anything applied here, so it's not entirely sure whether it's supposed to be the first time each skill test or the first time ever. Like, when the enemy enters play, the first time you do it, and then once it leaves play, it resets. my ruling, or basically my reading is based on what people on Discord saying, which is that it is supposed to be the ladder. So if you attack this once, you reveal a bunch of extra tokens, then the second time that ability isn't going to trigger. But please check the FAQ or whatever for that. It might be in the rulebook. We don't know. We do... Either way, I think this card is whatever. We're going to have to discuss it with a little bit of doubt. But I think it is interesting. It cares about how many empty arcane slots you have. So as a Mystic, obviously you want to be playing lots of spells, but not every Mystic necessarily wants to fill up all your arcane slots. So this is kind of a gotcha enemy in that sense. But compared to other weakness enemies, it's actually not that bad. There's not a lot of weakness enemies that only have 2 health, and the ones that do typically have other things going on and hit for harder. The fact that this only deals 1 horror means that even if you can't kill it, it probably isn't going to kill you that quickly. If you're Agnes, you're just laughing at this thing. If you're using something like Shards of the Void, you could potentially use this to grab a whole bunch of zeros from the bag. And if you're using something like Storm of Spirits, if you attack a different enemy, this ability isn't going to trigger, and then you can use the area of effect damage to kill this thing very efficiently. I think, all in all, I'm actually not super excited for this card specifically, but I'm kind of excited for the idea of class-specific weaknesses in general, and I think this card is fine. I think this card, as it sits right now, is the kind of weakness that makes me go, yeah, sure, whatever. You know, I don't feel the need to re-roll this one, but I also don't think it's like that exciting. And then finally, wrapping up the video, we have String of Curses, another fantastic piece of art, previewed on Reddit. It is a 1-cost 0 XP Mystic event with a combat and agility icons. It is a spell, and it reads Parlay. Choose a non-elite enemy at your location, and either, choose one, automatically evade that enemy, place 1 doom on it. It cannot take damage for the remainder of the round. Discover 1 clue at your location. Or, if that enemy has 1 or more doom on it, defeat it. Gain 1 resource for each doom that was on it. This is a very interestingly designed card. So it basically has a bunch of different modes depending on what you do with it. For starters, it is just kind of another under surveillance, which is you can automatically evade an enemy and put a doom on it to discover a clue at your location. If you're in the witching hour, that is basically free, so you get to automatically evade an enemy for 1 cost and get a clue, which is a pretty nice deal. But it also has this kind of waylay style defeat an enemy without having to worry about how much health they have or any other kind of abilities. It's just completely testless. That's crazy good. I'm specifically thinking of this as kind of a cultist stack. Cards like Wizard of the Order or the Brotherhood Cultist can stack up Doom quite quickly, and the ability to go, no, you're just dead now, is really cool. One specific synergy that people have already talked about is the Double combo in Sefina Rousseau, most likely, where you can play this card twice. The first time adding the first mode, so automatically evade an enemy, getting a clue, and then because the enemy then has Doom on it, you defeat it when you replay it with Double. Keeping in mind that it says that you cannot take damage for the remainder of the round, but you can still defeat it in other ways. The fact that this defeats the non-elite enemy is kind of neat. That doesn't happen too often. Often these kinds of effects are discarding. It's a blessing and a curse. If the enemy has victory points, it is very nice to be able to just kill them. But also certain effects trigger when enemies are defeated that don't trigger when they're discarded. And so, I don't know. I think this card is powerful, but I wonder how often it will be sitting in my hand and I'm unable to play it because I have no good way of killing the enemy once I put a Doom on it. On the other hand, I really like Mystic just getting more Doom cards because I feel like it is adding to that risk-taking factor of Mystic. And I really like the design of this card in general. The fact that it is a spell event means it's very good with Arcane Initiate. It's good in Agnes with her Heirloom. And in general, I think it's just a very interestingly designed card. And we've also seen a lot of parlay cards in this expansion. So I'm curious if there's a parlay investigator either in this expansion or maybe coming up down the road. And that's it. That's the 7 cards that I've had to talk about in this video. However, I do know that there's more previews coming very soon, so keep a close eye out on this channel. I will, of course, be covering all of them. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll be seeing you until the end of time.